This is a fictional story told for entertainment. The moment I heard her voice in the mall restroom, sweet, rehearsed, as casual as someone asking for directions, my stomach dropped like I'd swallowed a stone. "We'll just move it tonight. Ryan will sign, and I'll take care of the rest." It was 2 words that rearranged my life. Move the money. I stood there with soap in my hands and heard my son's name on a stranger's lips, as if it were a plot line she'd been practicing for weeks. "I'm Linda Hartman. I'm 70. I started a company with my late husband Richard in the kind of garage that makes for bad insurance photos and good stories. We scraped Petri dishes and coffee cups together and built Hartman Pharmaceuticals from nothing until it mattered. We grew it like careful gardeners grow an orchard, stubborn, slow, and with a lot of pruning. Ryan grew up in that orchard. He knew lab jokes before his first birthday and learned to respect the place like it was another member of the family. When Richard passed, the company became my life and my legacy. I was getting ready, finally, to step down, hand over the keys, and see the business in hands I trusted. I had imagined a ribbon cutting and maybe a nap afterward. I did not imagine a mall restroom would be the place that changed all of that. If you love a good twist, hit subscribe and stay with me. Natalie was 25, smooth as glass. She smiled in the right spots, laughed in time, and wore the kind of confidence that comes from being trained to sell a story. She'd been in Ryan's life for a year, engaged, bright, and very convincing. Derek was the other piece of the puzzle, another polished guy, calling himself a tech founder, talking about modernizing systems and strategic partnerships with a vocabulary that smelled faintly of venture capital. They made a tidy pair. I did what every mother does. I watched, and I tried not to be the mother who watched too closely. A week after that restroom incident, Ryan came to me at dinner with his mouth full of words I recognized, words rehearsed by other people. He talked about opportunity, about keeping the company relevant, about trusting the right partners. When he named a figure, $2 million, I remember the room tunneling like the world was narrowing to that number. He said it like somebody handing over a small favor to a friend. He didn't look like a thief. He looked worried and earnest. He said Natalie believed in the idea. He said Derek had a prototype. He said Richard would have wanted us to innovate. I looked at him and felt the old gears in me click. Protect the legacy, but don't be the tyrant who thinks young people are always short-sighted. So I asked questions, and I watched his face. I should have been in Italy. I had the plane ticket, a map folded open to the Amalfi Coast, and a list of trattorias I intended to try. But that voice in the restroom had lodged itself behind my ribs. Mother's intuition is annoying in that way. It doesn't wait for drama, it nags you like an old smoke alarm. I postponed the flight. I don't like to be the person who rushes into a situation, but I am very good at noticing the shape of trouble before it throws a punch. Then I saw the number. It was a transfer authorized in Ryan's name. $2 million leaving Hartman accounts. A signature that looked like his. A timestamp that matched the days Natalie had flown in for strategy meetings. I felt a hollow, like putting my hand on the socket without realizing it. I called Sarah Harper, a detective friend who had once solved a case involving counterfeit drugs and a man who thought he could outsmart common sense. Sarah's not the kind of friend who comforts you and goes home. She's the kind who makes a plan. She told me calmly that we should assume it was a crime until proven otherwise. Calm in a crisis is a rare perfume. She wears it well. Sarah called the bank. The transfer was put on hold, frozen. The bank didn't like the paperwork. They didn't like where the money was going. They asked for confirmation. 2-factor authentication helped in a way I'm relieved to say. It gave us time. Natalie and Derek had assumed a swept-clean path. 2-step checks and human skepticism plugged the leak. I won't tell you exactly how the system worked, that's not the point. But I'll tell you, it bought us something priceless. Time to see who would move and how fast. We decided to bait them. Sarah suggested a meeting, a casual sit-down to discuss partnership details, and I offered the garage, the recognizable old Hartman space that said, "This is family, this is home." We recorded legally, no cosplay of entrapment, just a record so we'd know what they were pitching versus what they were doing. I didn't think of myself as brave. I thought of myself as necessary. Maybe necessity is the most honest motive for courage. The meeting was a study in charm. Derek arrived in a blazer that fit like someone else's resume. Natalie sat like she had sat at brunches before and leaned forward as if to share a secret. They spoke about synergies and user data and cloud efficiencies, words that on first listen could make a boardroom nod in approval. But when Sarah asked for documentation, for a timeline, for something tangible, the smell of polish faded. Derek's smile returned, but his eyes looked at Natalie for a cue. That's the thing about rehearsed confidence. It needs a conductor. I pressed the details, because that's what you do when someone asks to handle your life savings. A week to prototype. Where were the patents? The answers came in drips and deferments. I'd send this tomorrow, we're finalizing that, but no paper trail. Natalie started to get impatient. She touched Ryan's hand across the table and whispered something I couldn't hear. Ryan tensed in that way someone does when their map and their compass disagree. Then the text messages started. At first, they were the usual, hearts, photos, the mundane exchange that lives happily under the veneer of romance. Later, the tone changed. "You can show her tonight," one read. "Make it look like you signed," another. The words were small, but their implication was large and jagged. I watched Ryan's face when I let him read my expression. He looked like a boy who had been given an adult script and was trying to follow it. He hadn't meant to do harm when he signed that authorization. He'd signed because someone he loved told him the right story. That does not excuse him, but it explains him. We had to be smart about what came next. You don't call out your son in public without a plan. You don't accuse and then take your accusations to dinner like polite gossip. Sarah and I crafted a setup that felt like counterintelligence. A meeting baited with the illusion of acceptance, surveillance just out of sight, legal counsel on speed dial. We froze the funds officially. The bank held the purse strings and the paperwork. They were cooperative once presented with suspicious activity and the promise of legal follow-through. I remember feeling oddly proud that the bureaucracy could be on the side of right. It should have stayed simple. It did not. The escalation was messy and quick. One night, after a text showing Ryan tied to a chair in a clearing, a promise and a threat wrapped into one, I drove to where the GPS pinged and found myself in a dark place that felt engineered to frighten. I had learned over the years that danger has a taste. It is metallic and thin, and it sits on the back of your tongue. A man thought he could extort the company by using my son as leverage. Someone had expected me to be too old to fight, to be too sentimental to be legalistic, to be meaner than maternal. They miscalculated. They brought me to a clearing that smelled like wet earth and pine. Natalie was there, and Derek, with faces like rehearsed indictments. They told me to sign papers on a tablet or watch them force the transfer. They suggested the bank's freeze could be undone if I complied. They thought fear would bend me. They forgot two things. One, that fear looks a lot like anger when it gathers in an old woman's chest. And two, that I had Sarah on the line and a silent alarm in my phone. They produced a gun. I won't spell out the theatrics because there is no need to glorify it. People commit violent acts in fiction without us needing to savor the mechanics. What matters is the human electrical moment, the way a plan collapses under pressure and how the smallest sound can change it. I had been given a panic button disguised as an app by Sarah long before. A petty, practical thing called a silent alarm. I pressed it under the table of what looked like cooperation. It was a ridiculous, mundane push of a thumb that felt like telling a secret to an old friend. While they tried to bully me into compliance, their confidence frayed. Two-factor authentication gave excuses to stall. "I need the code," they demanded. The delay mattered. It let Sarah and the local police coordinate a response. It let the idea of consequence intrude on the cartoon of control they had drawn around themselves. It let reality catch up. When the headlights flashed and the voice of an officer read out Miranda-like lines, Derek's composure faltered, as if someone had popped the slate from beneath his feet. Natalie, who had been practiced in polite cruelty, went pale like a woman who realized she had agreed to a role that included jail time. Ryan, when I saw him after, looked at us all with a face that read, "I thought I was doing what was right, and I was wrong." He had been convinced by a woman who had rehearsed what to say, by a man who used jargon like an anesthetic. He had been convinced that taking a shortcut would be a kindness to the company. It was not. The rescue was efficient and, to my surprise, almost gentle. The officers moved like people who understand how fragile the line is between danger and order. Sarah had coordinated. Federal agents stood by in case Derek's tech had implications beyond our little clearing. No one got theatrically injured. Nobody needed the sort of melodrama you see in bad movies. Instead, we had the quieter satisfaction of paperwork and cuffs. The money, thankfully, remained frozen. It felt like having caught a thief with a net rather than a trap. The stolen thing stayed where it belonged. What followed was inevitable, but not uncomplicated. Arrests, interviews, and the slow machinery of justice. Derek and Natalie were charged. The prosecutors worked through the strangest mixture of love and betrayal, a young woman convincing the man she loved to betray his family, a man who could not say no to the language of a partner. The legal system did its work in the way systems do, messily, with hearing rooms and indictments and the dull thump of judgments. I won't pretend every hearing was easy to sit through. Listening to my son explain, to try to map his hurt and his mistakes, made me realize how much of Leadership 101 is also about forgiveness and firm boundaries. Ryan pleaded guilty to his part, but not with the old shame. There was a new dignity to it. He expressed remorse that sounded like someone learning to say the right words the hard way. He took responsibility, not just because the law required it, but because he had seen what his choices did. Endangered me, endangered the company, endangered his own soul. He worked with the company under supervision, attended counseling, and most importantly, started learning the parts of leadership that have nothing to do with charm: consistency, transparency, and accountability. The court suggested time. Sentencing was a legal process that I will not reduce to a simple scorecard here, but they faced consequences appropriate to their crimes. Our legal system, flawed as it is, did what it had to do. People sometimes ask if justice feels like revenge. For me, justice felt like restoration. The money was returned. The corporate systems were audited and fortified. We tightened access in ways that are boring to describe, but essential in practice. Ryan took over operation with a humility that had replaced his earlier bravado. He did not leap to the hot seat with swagger. He sat, studied, and listened. He made mistakes after that, who doesn't? But they were the tradable currency in a company learning to be led with honesty. I retired 2 years later. I finally took that trip to Italy, and it was as restful and restorative as everyone promises postcards are. I walked slow streets, ate too much gelato, and learned to be present without the hum of a corporation in my ear. Retirement for me was less an exit than a rearrangement of priorities. I stayed involved as an advisor, but from a distance that let me be a mother and not a constant CEO. If there's any triumph here, it's not in the cuffs or the court transcripts. It's in the fact that a family, wounded, yes, learned something about boundaries. It's in the way a son took responsibility and rebuilt trust with small, steady acts. It's in the reminder that being underestimated because of age is not the same as being powerless. I had experience, patience, and stubborn curiosity. Those things kept me awake in a mall restroom and made me press my thumb when it mattered. The moral of the story is twofold. First, trust your instincts. They are honed by years of small betrayals and small victories. They are rarely dramatic, but often correct. Second, protect the work you built without letting it calcify into paranoia. There's a balance between guarding your legacy and smothering the people you want to mentor. That balance is a negotiation, and sometimes it requires hard boundaries and legal allies. People will always try to sell something: ideas, love, futures. Charm can be weaponized. Two people together, leaning on each other, can convince someone to cross a line they would never have crossed alone. That is the tragedy and the lesson. We must teach the next generation how to say no, how to ask for proof, and how to remember that shortcuts taken with someone else's trust rarely end well. So yes, the daughter-in-law convinced my son to steal. She convinced him with rehearsed lines, with a picture of urgency, and with the kind of shortcut that looks like love. But convincing him was not the end. It was the beginning of accountability, justice, and, surprisingly, redemption. That is the real payoff. A son who learned to lead, a company that survived because the people in it refused to let charm substitute for documents, and a woman who got to see the things she and her late husband built continue under better stewardship. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done when you heard those words in the restroom? Tell me in the comments. I'd like to know. If this kind of story interests you, subscribe for more. I've got a few more from the archives that I think you'll enjoy.